Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prana nata pada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasha dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Bilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashwat Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payurasho Mudake Dato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Mudna Nipatyakshito Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Namah Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambujo Radha Madana Mohano Oh, and I have this Kaviraja Goswami Pranam. Ihavarati Radha Krishna Kunjadikari Tadubhaya Rasarite Shuddha Siddhanta Dhari Sakala Sujana Geya Krishna Dasa Videya Paramakilam Gunanam Kaviraja Kavinam Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhaktamaj Jai Rashito Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lila Shunite Galai Shila Tahate Na Huilo Marachita Jeva Nahi Bhuji Keva Shunite Seha Kiad Bhuta Caitanya-carit Krishna upajive priti janive rasarariti shunile borohoihit Shriyatam nityam giyatam mura Chintyatam bhakta Caitanya-caritamrta By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Swabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pads, dear hand-picked Vaishnava, the king of poets, who is like a songbird in the inexhaustible sky of Gaura-lila, Sri Krishna Das, Kaviraja Gosvami, the author of our Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. Again, today we'll absorb ourselves in that very text. So today we'll go through the second half of this Asat-sanga prakaran, or the conduct of a Vaishnava in avoiding Asat-sanga tyag. So in our last reading, we started this prakaran. We went through some of the citations of Bhagavan Kapiladev in regard to this topic, and today we'll look at some additional ones from the Bhagavatam. So Mahaprabhu, after speaking about the importance of sadhu-sanga, and after citing a verse of Rishabdev in the Bhagavatam describing service to Mahatmas or sadhus as the doorway to liberation, and as an involvement in Asat-sanga as the doorway to darkness or samsara, then he elaborated on the importance of sadhu-sanga, and after that, then he speaks about the necessity of avoiding Asat-sanga. So we began that discussion last time with this well-known payar, Asat-sanga sadatyag e Vaishnav achar, that the conduct of a Vaishnava is always to avoid Asat-sanga. So to avoid it, we have to identify it. So what is Asat-sanga? Krishna, Stri-sangiyaka sadhu Krishna bhakta are. That those who are attached to women are one type of Asat-sanga, and non-bhaktas of Krishna are another. And we had some discussion about the gendered language in the text and the Bhagavatam and the broader Shastra's intent for this not to be interpreted as limited to the perspective of one group in regard to such attachment, but rather is intended to be interpreted as applicable to one's own case, whatever that case may be. So today we'll look at some remaining statements of Kapila-dev and a couple of other citations that Mahaprabhu gives on this topic. So I'm picking up from verse 89, citation from Bhagavatam 3:31, 33 and 34. The verse under discussion thus evidences Sriman Mahaprabhu's designation of Sangis of women as the first type of non-sadhu, yet also makes it clear that Sangha to and with women is also a form of Asat-sanga. So we talked about the word Sangha, how it's used with either the third case or the seventh case to refer to either attachment or to, just physical presence or association, and how both of these senses are indicated or part of the use of the word Sangha. Thus we're leaving the word untranslated. So a Sangi, then a quote Sangi of women, or a Stri-sangi would be one who both remains in the presence of them as well as one who fosters attachment to them. And as we discussed, the mental attachment is the actual problem, so to speak, and because the physical presence is conducive to the generation and the intensification of that attachment, then both are considered to be avoided. So, although Mahaprabhu says that Stri-sangis are a type of Asat-sanga and non-bhaktas are another type, what we see in the verses that he quotes is that it's not only these two types of Asat-sanga that exist, but rather there are other types. And in the case of a sadhaka, although the sangis, or the fosterers of attachment to women, are considered to have more detrimental influence than even the companionship of women, nevertheless that women, and again, fill in the blank with the word women according to whatever may be appropriate in one's individual case, that also is a type of Asat-sanga here as per the Bhagavatam. So, without further ado, Satyam Shotyam Dayamonam Buddhir Hri Shri Yasha Kshama Shama Damo Bhagas Cheti Yat Sangat Yati Sankshayam Teshvashanteshu Mudeshu Kanditatman Vasadushu Sangam Nakuryat Cheshu Yoshit Krida Mrigeshu Cha. One should not foster Sangha to non-sadhus, those who are peaceless, foolish, self-betraying, deplorable, and toy animals of women. As a result of Sangha to whom truthfulness, cleanliness, kindness, silence, discernment, modesty, fortune, renown, forbearance, repose, self-control, and prosperity are completely lost. So these are strong remarks of Kapila-dev. So we'll look a little bit at what some of the commentators have given on this verse. Sri Chakravarti Pad introduces these verses as follows. Quote, the question may arise, who are the Asat specifically? Thus, Bhagavan Kapila defines them and prohibits their Sangha with 3 verses. quote, to those who are self-betraying, kanditatmasu, refers to those who are self-destroying as a result of causing the downfall of the self, meaning as a result of acting in a manner that leads to their own spiritual ruination. Sri Samipad comments on these verses as follows. Bhagavan Kapila condemns Asat-sanga with 3 verses. Quote, discernment, or listing the things that are lost as an effect of Asat-sanga, discernment refers to that the object of which is the supreme Purushartha. That is, it refers to one's application of discernment in pursuing the supreme Purushartha. So, the buddhi, or the discernment, is a faculty that we all have. It's not that you literally lose your mind, but just as we say in English, that I lost my mind because of some traumatic circumstance or some ingesting some drug or whatever, then here, to say that one loses their buddhi is to say that their application of the buddhi towards what it is best applied to, or seeking the ultimate fulfillment of one's life, or the ultimate object that can be attained in life, that becomes lost, or one experiences resistance or detriment to that functioning as a result of this Asat-sanga. So in other words, under the particular influence of the presence or the attachment to others, then one's discernment, one doesn't think right, or one doesn't think straight, or so to speak, would be to put it in plain language. Quote, fortune refers to that in the form of wealth and grain. In other words, when you lose your discernment, you cease to act in a way that leads to your own benefit, even in a material way, so you can ultimately lose your own wealth. So just as persons who become attached to women can, engage in various nefarious activities in order to fulfill their attachments, and then, end up addicted to drugs or compromising their job or things like this, and then ultimately lose everything, and as they say in the conventional sense. Modesty refers to one's sense of decency. So people can lose any decency, can act very, aggressively or boisterously or what have you, when they pursue such rajasic attachment. Renown refers to fame. You can lose your good name. Forbearance refers to being tolerant. Repose refers to control of the external senses. Self-control refers to control of the mind. Prosperity refers to advancement in the worldly sense. Yat sangat means as a result of sanga to whom, that is, to the sat. To those who are self-betraying refers to those who have the notion of self in relation to the body. That is, those who deny or don't act in the interest or without recognition of their true self. Quote, to those who are toy animals of women refers to those who are subservient to women like toy animals. Sri Sanatana largely follows Sri Samipad's explanation of these verses in his commentary, but alternately states that, quote, repose refers to the psyche's withdrawal from enjoyment, self-control refers to control of the external senses, and those who are self-betraying refers alternately also to those whose minds are unsteady, and therefore deplorable, that is, reprehensible. So, details in terms of how the list is given in the verse. But the point is that all of these things are lost if one engages in asat-sanga, or one fosters attachment to those who are non-sadhus, those who don't have all these things, forbearance, truthfulness, kindness, discernment, and so on. If we keep the company of those who lack those things, we'll also end up lacking them, is the gist of the point. So, by citing these statements of Bhagavan Kapila, Sriman Mahaprabhu further evidences who is to be regarded as asat and further demonstrates the detriment of Asat-sanga, so as to underscore the importance of his instruction to avoid Asat-sanga. Following the statements made in the 3 verses thus cited, Bhagavan Kapila goes on in his teachings to Mother Devahuti to explain in 7 verses how Sangha with women causes detriment for those on the path of intentness or sammukhya upon the Paratattva. Sri Chakravarti Pad introduces these verses as follows. So, I'm adding a bit from the Prakaran in the Bhagavatam that Mahaprabhu just cited 3 verses from, because the overall import of what Kapiladev has to say comes out in the additional statements that he makes, and it brings the whole topic of avoiding Asat-sanga all the more, vivid into our understanding. So these verses are introduced by Chakravarti Pad by saying, quote, "And it is not to be said that a woman cannot bewilder the mind of a great personage, endowed with discernment, knowledge, and so on." In other words, if Kapiladev says, don't associate with women or those attached to women because you can lose your mind, to put it bluntly, then someone might say, well, that might apply to common people, but a great person, a very wise person, a very discerning person, they're certainly beyond this influence. They don't need to worry about it. So here, Kapiladev doesn't want people to think that. In other words, everyone has to be careful about this. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. It doesn't matter how, old you are or how senior you are or how sharp your intellect is or whatever. Everyone has to be cautious, has to take this matter seriously. Therefore, he continues and speaks the following verses. Bhagavan Kapila's subsequent statements demonstrate that Srimad Bhagavatam itself clearly explains that it is not women specifically, but rather persons of a gender to which one is prone to attachment that are to be regarded as asat, in accord with the mentality acquired by a jiva in a given term of embodiment. So what's also nice about these comments, or these additional statements of Kapiladev, is that in the initial statements it's spoken from what you might call the conventional male-centric heterosexual perspective of giving warning to men who have, that particular mentality. But that this is, that way of speaking is meant to be applied in the case of each listener according to their particular mentality and not to exclusively refer to that, is demonstrated here by Kapiladev himself, where he also speaks about, you could say, a consequent scenario that can arise from neglecting to follow what he's teaching. So we'll see that in this stack of verses that come next. So, it looks like I'm missing the number on these. Sorry, I'll have to add that. Alright, so, let me see here. The progenitor, namely Brahma, upon seeing his own daughter, became allured by her figure. Deprived of shame, he donned the form of a stag, and pursued her, dwelling in the form of a doe, after she donned that form in an attempt to evade him. So this is to say that if Brahma himself, the original guru of all the rishis, of all the devas, the original, propagator of the Vedic knowledge and the Vedic wisdom, if even he can be allured by the figure of a woman, and not only any woman, but even his own daughter, then what capacity do others have to be free from such a state? This is the import. In other words, if even persons like this may struggle with this object, then it goes without saying that common human beings certainly will. Among his emanations, their emanations, their emanations, and their emanations, that is, among the sons of Brahma such as Marichi, sons of Brahma's sons such as Kashyapa, and sons of Brahma's sons, such as the devas and human beings. Indeed, what man here in this world, apart from Narayan Rishi, remains of mind unperturbed by Maya in the form of a woman? So Narayan Rishi is considered a Shaktivish avatar of Narayan himself. So it says, and there's different interpretations of this particular statement. I've given one of those that the commentators give. But it's as if to say, no one but Bhagavan is free from susceptibility to this, is in gist the way this interpretation gives it. So behold the power of my Maya in the form of a woman, who just by the furrowing of her brows renders even conquerors of the directions, that is, warriors or emperors, defeated from strikes from her feet. And then the commentator adds, when they fall before them in an attempt to appease her. Neither one desirous of ascending to the highest pinnacle of yoga, that is a jnani, nor one who has reached realization of the self through service to me, that is a bhakta, should ever foster attachment to women, even one's own wife, who the wise say are the doorway to hell, meaning samsara, for him, that is, any man. So one point I'll add here is that these type of statements are also referred to in the 11th canto by Bhagavan Sri Krishna, where he adds that statements like this to completely avoid any form of attachment to women or involvement in any interaction with women is given to those who've adopted either the path of Gyan or the path of Bhakti and a path of complete dedication in what is conventionally known as a role of renunciation. So for persons in their case, then to foster that attachment is a sort of a doorway to hell or a doorway down, if you will. But he says in the case of grihastas who are already avowed to a relationship and a responsibility shared with a woman, then it ought not be seen in quite the same way. In other words, it's not that they're quote-unquote falling down by doing this, but rather that once they're already there, there's no way to go down, so to speak. They're already in the state in which that attachment is coloring or influencing a significant aspect of the way that they live their life. But be that as it may, in this particular statement, the commentator adds that when it says not to foster attachment to women, then it's even that includes even one's spouse. This is Jiva Gosvami Cakravarti Pad adding that detail. So this doesn't mean that anyone who hears this should think, oh, now I have to get divorced or something like this, but rather that there's a distinction between attachment and upholding one's responsibilities within the relationships that one has formed. So that distinction is to be sustained. We're not trying to promote any extreme behavior or unprincipled and unconsidered life decisions, but rather simply to understand the influence that particular types of companionship and attachment have, and to be wary about that as one goes about one's spiritual practice. And there's more on this topic. So he says, one should see her, Maya, a woman finely fashioned by Bhagavan, who gently approaches a man on the pretext of service, a desire to learn, or otherwise. So these little details are added by Sridhar Samipad and by Vishwanath Chakravarti Pad. So as if to say, it's not that someone that causes someone to fall down walks up and says, hi, I'm here to cause you to fall down. Rather, they come with this idea that, oh, this is going to be conducive to your spiritual practice. And they come with the interest and the appearance of coming to, assist or to show interest in that. And in many cases, not with any intent to cause any detriment to the person. But such is the nature of this type of attachment, such is the absence of discernment that emerges when these elements are brought together, such that these things happen. So therefore, Kapila Dev is saying, that that Maya gently approaches. In other words, Maya approaches politely, in a way that you'll like, in a way that you'll be accepting of and think, oh, okay, no problem. And that's precisely how she enters, just as Putana arrived looking like a lovely, lady of Braja. Then Mother Yashoda's thinking, oh, how nice, sure, let her come and cradle baby Krishna. Not suspecting that she had the worst of intentions. So I just make that comparison based on appearances. Anyway, I'll read it one more time. One should see her, Maya, a woman finely fashioned by Bhagavan, who gently approaches, to be one's own death, that is cause of ruination, like a well hidden by grass. In other words, that it's not easy to see. In other words, like a trap. One who has attained, quote, womanhood, that is, been reborn as a woman. So the implication here is that when one thus becomes attached to Maya, then what happens to that man who became attached to Maya in the form of a woman? He becomes a woman. So one who has attained womanhood, meaning been reborn as a woman, as a result of attachment to woman, that is, as a result of thinking of a woman at the time of death of one's previous body, should know that Maya of Mayan, which, as it now acts like a male, one out of delusion considers to be one's husband, provider of wealth, children, and a house, which is the constitution of, or the source of, one's husband, children, and house, and which is conveyed by destiny to be one's own death, that is, cause of ruination, like the singing of a hunter to a deer, which is pleasing to a deer and appears favorable, yet is the means by which the deer is caught and killed. So these, again, points drawn out of the Tikas. So in other words, as a deer is said to, this is a Kavya Prasiddhi example, is said to like flute music and then come running to enjoy the music, and as a result of that get shot by an arrow from a hunter, then also the person, or in this case the woman, thinking, oh, this husband and this family and this wealth that are all coming to me, this is all so, good for me, or also so desirable, that one should see that like that, this is actually how Maya is shackling the mind of such a person. So, again, it's clear here from Kapila Dev's statements that just as the woman is said to be the finely fashioned form of Maya for the man, then so also the man is for the woman. So this makes it obvious that it's the attachment which is the actual problem. There's no preference or attempt to belittle one gender or another or what have you. So Chakravarti Pad elucidates some of the points made in these verses as follows. Quote, behold the power of my Maya in the form of a woman, filled with jealous anger, who just by the furrowing of her brows, that is, knitting them out of anger so as to suggest, leaving me, you go out and conquer the directions to enjoy women of other countries. Shame on you! Renders immediately even emperors returning to their own inner apartments after conquering all the directions, defeated by strikes from her feet, when they bow down before her in an attempt to appease her. So Chakravarti Pad will like to give some vivid illustrations here. So, it was earlier said by Kapila Dev that, behold the power of my Maya in the form of a woman, who by the furrowing of her brows renders even emperors defeated by strikes from her feet. So Chakravarti Pad is giving some context to that. It's as though these, kings went out, conquered other places, and, either married the princess of some place they conquered, or, took other women by force or what have you. And then when they come back to their own wife and queen in the inner apartment, then she's furious with them. She's not impressed by their, military success. She knows that their military success might even be motivated by their pursuit of these other, the booty of the victories, and therefore she expresses anger to them, and that men, out of their attachment to such a woman, will fall at her feet. So in other words, he who has such power to go out and conquer so many other warriors and win wars, he cannot, he becomes, devoid of any force. He becomes weak. He becomes controlled by the anger expressed by a woman, which ultimately means that he, loses himself because of his attachments, out of his desire, out of the maya that's captivated him in the interest of this particular object. Then, it's as if all his other capacities are arrested or paralyzed. So this is the point that he's trying to make when he says, "Behold the power of my maya," in the form of woman, means it's even more powerful than the sword, or even more powerful than the other things that a king might wield or be considered to have. So that's one point. Also, she too, this is from later, a comment on later in this statement, she too, who knowing a man to be renounced, approaches him on the pretext of service or otherwise, suggesting there is only desirelessness on her part, is also a cause of detriment, or anarthas. So in other words, if a man is observing renunciation, and then a woman approaches him on the pretext of rendering service or wanting to be a student or whatever, and conveying that she has no untoward desire of any type, she's desireless, then even that can actually result in anarthas. And we certainly don't want to name any names, but through and through in spiritual societies the world over, there are sadly countless examples of this, where even renounced persons and educated persons who've been dedicated to some spiritual discipline for many decades can at some point succumb to this very circumstance. So these statements here that Chakravarti Pad is drawing out, these are, to put it bluntly, they're very real and very applicable to today's society as much, or if not more, than even, traditional societies in previous decades or centuries. So, in this regard, it is suggested that verily in all cases a woman is to be completely avoided from afar, be she in all respects indifferent to attachment-inducing relations with a man, on account of her, like a well hidden by grass, not approaching even the vicinity of anyone, and not having the intent, quote, "let a man fall into me," or be she endowed with bhakti, knowledge, and non-attachment, or otherwise. Or, now this again is a classic Chakravarti Pad going very strong on this point, or be she unconscious as a result of mental imbalance, or be she sleeping, or be she even dead. So, I don't know how more strongly you could possibly make this point. In other words, what he's trying to say is that people shouldn't think, oh, I should avoid, just to use the classical example, a man might think, I should avoid a young, beautiful woman, but another woman who's not young and beautiful, that I don't have to worry about. So here Chakravarti Pad is saying, no. Even if the woman is not young and beautiful, even if she has no desire to seduce someone, even if she is a bhakta, even if she has vairagya, even if she's learned, and still this susceptibility, this danger is there. And not only that, even if she's unconscious, even if it's just a dead body, I mean, I'm sorry if that's almost morbid to say, but he's saying even if there's just a dead figure of a woman, there's still the susceptibility for a person's mind to become distracted or to become focused on a particular manner of thinking. There's a similar statement in the Caitanya-caritamrta where it's also said that even the wooden form of a woman can disturb the mind of a sage. So the import being, so if a wooden form can do that, how about a living form? So the Kaimutyanai goes that direction, but here Chakravartipad is taking it the opposite direction. So, as a woman is a cause of detriment, even for a man possessed of bhakti and knowledge, so exactly a man is also such for a woman possessed of bhakti and knowledge. So, simply put, even if people are quote-unquote good devotees and very learned, still this type of danger is there. So this is something that's just to be observed all throughout one's life, because sadly there are cases of people even in 70s, 80s going on that, this type of difficulty arises in their life. So just as one analogy I'll just give is that anytime you walk, when we walk, think walking is effortless and the easiest task, but when you become elderly and your bones become weak, if you might lose your balance and fall and break your hip, So even something as simple as walking is nevertheless always something that one has to do carefully. One should always keep their balance, in other words. So in this regard, there's a never-ending necessity for vigilance. So this is what the commentators, this is what Kapila Dev, this is what Mahaprabhu wants to convey, that if we are sincere in our spiritual pursuit, then we have to be vigilant about the susceptibility that the conditioned mind has. It's not, so to speak, anyone's fault, or it's not that, this isn't a challenge for everyone, but it's that we just have to soberly see the reality of the way the mind works, the condition of, human beings, and, all the more in a society, especially in neoliberal democratic societies of the modern day with, media and cinema industries and so forth, the way that they are, it's very much a reality that this is something that people have to be sober about, people have to take seriously, and it's also something that when one establishes an ethic and a good level of discipline about, it's relatively manageable to sustain when one gets into good habits and when one sustains, proper conduct in this respect. So another way it's put, there's a statement in, I think it's the Viduraniti section of the Mahabharata, where it's explained that one is not advised to conquer sleep by putting on one's pajamas and laying down in bed. In other words, if you're trying to stay up all night, the best way to stay up all night is not to just lay in bed exactly where it's the easiest place to fall asleep. So similarly, if we want to avoid this type of thing, then generally we're advised not to put ourselves into situations where our tendency towards these things can get the better of us. So this is the common sense that is to be followed, and this is what's observed, be it in, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever traditions the world over. There's, a universal recognition of the value of a certain degree of isolation for people who want to keep up their spiritual discipline and ethics in this respect. So we do well to, from time to time, remind ourselves of these things and carry on. But as we discussed also last time, one important point of balance is that in the case of trying to avoid attachment or unnecessary interaction and association, at the same time we don't want to be disrespectful, and we don't want to develop a sense of enmity, a sense of superiority, or to fail to show due respect to those persons that we may also wish to remain distant from to a certain extent. So this is another side of the balance to be maintained. Okay, then I have just one other point from the Bhagavatam, which is also poignant in this respect. So, in light of the high degree of susceptibility for detriment indicated in the aforecited verses and commentary, it is not surprising that Srimad Bhagavatam also elsewhere states the following injunction. Quote, one should not have a seat that is unseparated from even one's mother, sister, or daughter. The powerful multitude of senses pulls upon even a knowledgeable person. Sri Samipad summarizes this injunction's import to be that nearness to women is verily to be avoided in all respects. And Sri Lakshmidhar, in his sub-commentary on Sri Samipad's commentary, elaborates, quote, the a fortiori reasoning, much less than others, and all the more one who is not knowledgeable, is intimated. Which is to say, one should not sit unseparated even from one's mother, sister, or daughter, much less other women, since one's mother, sister, or daughter are least likely to be objects of lust. The reason being that the powerful senses pull upon even a knowledgeable person, and all the more upon one who is not knowledgeable. Sri Chakravarti Pad also comments, quote, furthermore, desire the object of which is women is extinguished only by proper conduct. In other words, to observe discipline in one's social dealings is the only way to deal with this. Thus, he shows the proper conduct. He speaks this verse, one should not have a seat that is unseparated, that is not separated apart, even from one's mother and so forth. In other words, he's saying there should be no bodily contact. The powerful multitude of senses pulls upon even a knowledgeable person. Observance of this injunction from Srimad Bhagavatam in regard to proper conduct in the context of management of the desire the object of which is women can thus be understood as representative of the conduct Sriman Mahaprabhu speaks about. Oma, oi sound ekটু বন্ধ করুন এই বন্ধ করুন সাউন্ডটা এখানে পাঠ হচ্ছে sorry, I'll just read that sentence again. Observance of this injunction from Srimad Bhagavatam in regard to proper conduct in the context of management of the desire the object of which is women can thus be understood as representative of the conduct Sriman Mahaprabhu speaks of in his previous statement, quote, avoidance of Asat-sanga, this is the conduct of a Vaishnava. So we're going full circle here. This prakaran, the fundamental instruction of Mahaprabhu, is avoid Asat-sanga, that this is the conduct of a Vaishnava. So what is that conduct? Then here this verse in the Bhagavatam is telling you that conduct. Avoid all bodily contact, avoid any unnecessary interaction, don't foster attachment. But, as we said, nevertheless, be respectful, be polite, don't be arrogant, don't be insensitive, etc. Further evidence of Sriman Mahaprabhu's strictness in this respect is found later here in Caitanya-caritamrta, in the second chapter of the Antya-lila, where Sriman Mahaprabhu's conduct with respect to his beloved Bhakta Choto Haridas is described. So I won't launch into that. That will come in Antya-lila, but there's a very significant, well-known event or narration regarding how Mahaprabhu set a very strict example in regard to the proper conduct, especially for renunciates and especially for young renunciates in this respect. So Mahaprabhu himself also observed such principles. He set the example of what he's saying. There's this statement also from the work of Kavi Karnapur cited in the Charitamrita, which is spoken in the context of his refusal to meet with Maharaj Prataparudra by saying that those who are niskinchana, or in other words, those who desire nothing of this world and are on the spiritual path, for them the company of a king as well as the company of a woman is akin to drinking poison. So Mahaprabhu used such, bold language in this respect. So, this is the main topic. Then finally, just to conclude this section, there's 2 additional verses of this section. So in those, we get the mention of the second category of Asat-sanga that Mahaprabhu mentioned. The first category was Stri-sangis. So we discussed how the association of those attached to women is a type of Asat-sanga. And then in this discussion today, it's also shown that in addition to that, women themselves are also to be considered a type of Asat-sanga. And again, by women, it means fill in the blank. And then the second category of Asat-sanga was non-bhaktas. So Mahaprabhu cites 3 verses to evidence the first category of Asat-sanga. He cites 2 verses to evidence the second category. So those 2 verses are as follows. Baram hutavaha jala punjarantar vyavastiti Nashori chinta vimuka janasangbasa vaishasam. Better dwelling inside a cage blazing with fire, and not the adversity of living together with a person adverse to thought of Hari, or Shori rather, which is a name of Hari, a name of Krishna. So again, very strong language. Better dwelling inside a cage blazing with fire, and not the adversity of living together with a person averse to thought of Shori. So Sanatana Pad also quotes this in Hari Bhakti Vilas, and he gives this comment there in the Digdarshini Tika. Quote, dwelling means abiding together prolongedly, that is, residing together. In other words, it's not that when he says samvasa, that it just means to interact with someone who's not a bhakta for a minute is going to, be a disaster or to be averted in this way. But what he means is to live together in a way, in a context where there's going to be a significant degree of mutual exchange, a degree of mutual influence. He's referring specifically to this. So, the adversity, that is suffering of, quote, living together with a person who is averse even to thought of Shori, that is Sri Krishna, is certainly not to be tolerated at all. This is the meaning because of living with such persons being a cause of detriment in regard to both worlds. That is the pursuit of higher attainment in this world and the next, even for one's community. That is not only oneself. So if you want to be a bhakta, you need to associate with bhaktas. If you're pursuing bhakti, if you're pursuing Bhagavan, if you associate with those who are averse even to the thought of Bhagavan, that is in no way going to nourish and support one's own cultivation. It's going to be an untoward influence. Therefore, it's best avoided. So this is the first point, and the second point to the same effect. Ma drakshi kshinapunyan kwachidapi bhagavad bhaktihinan manushyan. Do not in any case desire to see human beings who are bereft of bhakti to Bhagavan, and thus devoid of merit. So the implication is that the greatest merit or purity is bhakti. People who lack that, one need not desire to see them. So again, we can remember that this type of language is also existing within the social context in which these texts were composed, where social segregation was a very real thing. And within the context of the different varnas, there was very vivid distinctions between social groups, between persons of different mentalities, and a lot of sensitivity taken to sustain the customs, sustain the norms that were cherished by the particular community in which one was from or to which one belonged. So this idea of not wanting to see or to interact with others was something that, in certain eras was very much something that was lived out. And also, we can add, was practically more livable in a village context where you might actually be able to accomplish that. In today's urban environments, it's hardly possible for anyone to try to literally apply this sort of thing. And it's also, that's why I've also translated this drakshi to convey that it's a desiderative form of the verb, because some translators in Bengali, they've just given it as don't look or don't see. But since that's basically impossible, it's significant that actually what it's saying is don't want to see that. In other words, what really impacts us, what really deepens our non-devotional samskaras, so to speak, is the desires that we foster and act on for things that are unrelated to bhakti. So just as Uttam Bhakti is free from desirousness of anything other than Bhagavan and anything other than Bhakti, so that will necessarily include the desire to have the company of those who are not bhaktas, those who don't cherish that ultimate central object of one's own desire and aspiration. So like goes with like, stick in the company of those who share your aims, avoid the company of those who are pursuing aims that lead to detriment in your pursuit of your aims, and avoid the company of things that can lead to one acting upon various susceptibilities that one may have in the process of pursuing the aspirations that one cherishes. This, in essence, is what this prakaran is about, avoiding Asat-sanga. And, we can spend many years cultivating and practicing to try to purify ourselves, and we can again pollute our minds in a matter of minutes. We can take actions and perform activities that can pollute our mind for a very prolonged period of time thereafter, lead to a very unfavorable samskar. These type of things can happen quickly. So we do well to be gentle, careful, cautious as we proceed on the path, but at the same time with enthusiasm and hopefulness, and not an excessive degree of fear or anxiety about these things either. So that's all I have for today. I'll conclude here. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, they're welcome to share.
Baba, in today's world, we would have to say that the media is so saturated with this type mood that it's also very dangerous, is it not?
It definitely is. I mean, whether it's popular films or, even the news, this images and discussion that favors the samskaras that cherish these type of things is the name of the game, so to speak, or the prominent thing. So, one has to be very sober in one's, decisions about what one wants to impress upon one's fragile, tender mind. If samskaras are sometimes considered impressions, then whatever imagery, whatever music, whatever we take in, it's impressioning, it's imprinting itself on our mind. So what kind of imprints do we want to be put there? We have to consider that carefully and, accept and reject accordingly.
Yes, thank you.
Yep, I see another hand.
Pranam Shri Krishna Sharan Dasa. I would turn on my video if I could, but unfortunately my camera's down today.
No worries.
I had a question about a tangentially related topic to the topic today. I wanted to ask for your perspective on the merits of lifelong brahmacharya. So is it something that's I've heard some people praise it very highly. Would you also praise it very highly, or what's your general perspective on it? I guess as compared with some sort of, living like the dharma of a, householder and getting married or something like that. What's your perspective on the relative merits of the two the two paths?
The main thing I can say is that every individual needs to follow the path that's suitable for them as a person. And the brahmacharya path is not for everybody. And generally speaking is definitely a minority section. To spend a period of time, to spend a period of education and training in that way, that's something that everybody can, and I won't say should, but would do well to spend, a period of time living that way. But as far as making it a lifetime decision and for it to realistically work out, there's quite an attrition rate out there. So it's something that, people need to take very carefully, very cautiously, and it requires a lot of self-knowledge to understand whether that's really the way that one will do best as an individual. And also, to succeed in it, I can just say that by far the most helpful thing is to find the association of others who can live that way in a healthy manner, because there's also a lot of the problems arise where persons are trying to live that way, but they're actually not qualified to be doing so, and they compensate for that lack of qualification with various unhealthy behaviors that can in some cases lead to them giving up that lifestyle, but in other cases can lead to them continuing that lifestyle, but at the same time doing other things that are really not very spiritually healthy. So to avoid a situation where you're sort of compensating for a weakness in this regard by taking to other sort of unhealthy things that can also lead to harmful behaviors for others, to avoid all of that, you're very lucky, so to speak, if you can find the company of people who are living happily and healthily in that lifestyle. And if it works for a person as an individual, and they're so fortunate to get the company of some people who are genuinely fit and happy in that way of life, then I can say it's really great. And that feeling of going for if you've ever gone backpacking, so to speak, or trekking, and if you've ever gone, they have what they call ultralight backpacking, is this way of going on a journey and having exactly what you need and not anything extra, and feeling like you're being able to do and make your journey efficiently. That's a great feeling. So, there's definitely, a lot of potential for great joy and great fulfillment in that lifestyle, provided one has the education and the companionship and the personal qualifications to live it out. So, in a few words, that's what I can say.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Baba, looking at yourself, and I know even many God sisters who have remained celibate and alone throughout their lives, there's also some samskar involved, don't you think? Because
absolutely,
the ability to come into this life and to have really finished all that in previous lives and be ready to go forward is a really wonderful, rare opportunity that even if you want to aspire for, you may not make it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, by purity or qualification, as I was referring to, you could definitely put samskar on that list as something that is required to live that way in a healthy manner, so to speak. Because when people lack the samskar for it, then they compensate and they remain a so-called, celibate, but then they're like greedy as anything after fame or social achievements or money, or, they compensate it with these other things. So, to do it in a way that's really balanced and actually leads to spiritual well-being, so to speak, you definitely need the samskar that suits you to that way of living. All right, well, I think we can conclude here, and I'd like to make one, I don't know, announcement, if I may, or if something like this, which is that starting from the next verse in the text, we come to a set of 11 verses on the topic of Sharanagati. And that continues into, after that comes the section on sadhana bhakti, and then the whole rest of the chapter is about the practicalities of sadhana bhakti. So this section on Sharanagati is very, very significant, and it's kind of the crucial transition from the theoretical into the practical. And the reality of things is that transitional area is, from one perspective, and as we'll look at in some of the statements, the most crucial element in order for the theory to approach the practice in a way that actually proves fruitful. So a number of the verses that are cited in this section are also found in the Prakaran on Sharanagati in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, as well as some of them are found in the much shorter Prakaran on Sharanagati in the Bhakti Sandarbha. So, if I may, we've been discussing the Caitanya-caritamrta at length for quite some time. I would like to introduce, I don't know if I can say a mini-series or a brief segue, and look at the Prakaran on Sharanagati in the Hari Bhakti Vilas. It's about 30 verses long, and I will not spend as much time on them as I'm spending on these with, comments and sub-comments and then all of this. We'll just look at the verses that Sanatana Gosvami quotes and Sanatana Gosvami's own comments. So I won't go into as much detail, but it's a very, very valuable section of the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and by going through that, it will really help us appreciate the gist of how Sharanagati is represented here by Mahaprabhu in the Caritamrita. And just on a personal note, for whatever it's worth, also my Guru Maharaj has written a book specifically on this topic, and he's given his own sub-commentary on the statements of Sanatana Gosvami in his commentary, so I may just, not in translation form, but I may share a few highlights from some of the points that he's also made, and that this will, be something that I think will really enrich our discussion of the Prakaran that comes here in the Caritamrita, and give us an all the more robust foundation for the sadhana bhakti discussion, and ultimately the practice of sadhana bhakti in our life thereafter. So from the next class, in other words, from the next verse here in the text starts the Sharanagati Prakaran. So I was thinking to discuss the Hari Bhakti Vilas section on Sharanagati as like a inner segment, so to speak, and then go through the discussion of it in the Caritamrita, because then the pyres in the Caritamrita will be more significant to us, and also the number of the verses that are quoted here in the Caritamrita are also quoted in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, so we won't need to redo them again. So I'm offering that, and I assume it's to be accepted. If so, then from the next class we'll proceed in that way briefly. And I think maybe in just one or two readings we should be able to go through the whole thing.
Looking forward to that.
Great. All right, well then, if that's it for today, I'll leave it off here. Vaishnavebhyo namo nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
There you go.
Thank you.